When she walked into the room, everyone laughed. Cheap shoes, a simple bag, a quiet posture. You don't belong here, they said. But 24 hours later she changed all of their fates. The inside of the meeting room with thick glass windows echoed with the soft laughter of the four-person board, gathered around a shiny table reflecting the morning light. Victoria Lehman, who slightly lowered her glasses to glance at the resume, was probably having the most entertaining moment of her day. Does she really think she's going to sit on the board in those shoes? She whispered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The young woman sitting across from her was silent. She wore a simple navy blazer, a knee-length skirt, and a classic but worn-out handbag. Her hair was neatly tied back. Her eyes were calm but alert. From the moment she entered the room, no one had paid attention to what she said, only what she wore. But no one knew that in just 24 hours, she would be sitting at the head of that table and have the authority to fire everyone there who was now mocking her. The woman's name was Laura Brandt. She was 35 years old and had a significant track record in business. She had founded and successfully managed her own initiative, Green Core Initiative, focused on sustainable development. She had even graduated at the top of her class and led innovative projects. However, due to an investor crisis, she had been forced to shut down her company last year. But she wasn't there to tell a failure story, but to evaluate her successes. The portfolio she held was still full of ideas worth millions of dollars. But the people sitting across from her had already decided to view her as a lost cause. Victoria, sitting at the corner of the table, was the HR director, and her voice carried a sneer in every word. "Ms. Brandt," she said, as if she had been there for ages and thought Laura was wasting her time. "Honestly, for you to think that your background qualifies you for a top position in a company like ours, that's brave." As she spoke these words, the smile at the corner of her lips was more condescending than anything else. Laura didn't look away for even a second. "I think my track record speaks for itself," she said in a soft yet firm tone. "The Green Core Initiative I ran for 7 years reached record levels both environmentally and financially with sustainability-focused projects. It was eventually valued at $48 million. There was a brief silence at the table. However, Victoria, as if none of it mattered, pushed the file with the tips of her fingers and winked at CFO Marcus Weber. Marcus cleared his throat sarcastically and spoke up. "But as far as we know, your company went bankrupt, didn't it?" This sentence caused some suppressed chuckles among a few people at the table. Laura remained calm. "Yes," she said. "When one of our investors pulled out, our planned expansion coincided with a financial crisis. But everything I went through gave me invaluable experience in crisis management." Her voice was now more solid than before. At that moment, Maria Kruger, the HR manager, looked up. She had been silent until then, but there was an unmistakable discomfort in her gaze. Victoria stood up. "Ms. Brandt, we are a large company operating internationally. Our corporate identity and the image we represent are very important. I'm sorry, but this profile doesn't fit with our line." She shoved the file back onto the table as if it were contaminated. "We'll get back to you," she said, attempting a smile, but her expression clearly said, "We won't be seeing you again." Laura silently placed her file into her bag. She was about to get up when the door suddenly opened. The man who walked in had a firm stride and a confident posture. He was tall, around 60, with gray hair. As soon as he entered, all attention turned to him. Silence thickened immediately. When his eyes landed on Laura, his expression changed. Surprise and recognition spread across his face simultaneously. "Laura," he said, both surprised and warm. Victoria's face drained of color. Marcus furrowed his brows. Maria lifted her head and started watching carefully. Laura nodded slightly. "Hello, Daniel," she said with a simple but deeply meaningful tone. Daniel Hartman was the company's CEO. No one questioned this detail when he entered the room, but now, his past with Laura changed the entire atmosphere of the room. "I wasn't expecting you here," Daniel said, approaching Laura and extending his hand. Then, he said that famous sentence, "Ms. Lehman, let me introduce you. This is Laura Brandt, the daughter of the founder of this company and now our new chairperson, with 51% of the shares." The silence that spread across the room turned into a kind of weight within seconds. Nothing had exploded, but in everyone's mind, a bomb had gone off. Victoria's face drained of color. Her skin turned porcelain pale, her pupils dilated, and her lips parted. Marcus' pen fell to the floor, but he didn't even consider picking it up. Maria, though surprised, was also secretly enjoying watching the dialogue between Daniel and Laura. The CEO of the company, Daniel Hartman, still had his hand on Laura's shoulder. This simple yet clear physical touch had completely turned the room's hierarchy upside down. "Daughter of the founder?" Victoria finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. But her last name was different. "It says Brandt." Laura slowly turned, locking eyes with Victoria. "I carry my mother's last name. When my father started this company, he changed his last name to Hartman, but he always told me to carve my own path. So, I kept my family name. He always believed someone's competence is shown by what they do, not their last name." This sentence was enough to stir not only Victoria, but Marcus as well. "But why did you apply with your identity hidden?" Marcus asked, his voice more controlled but clearly filled with panic. "Was this a test?" Laura shook her head. "No, it was a principle. My father wanted me to start at the bottom if I decided to work here and understand every level of the company. This was written in his will. The majority of the shares in the company were transferred to me, but with one condition. For the first 3 months, I had to apply without revealing my true identity and observe the system from within." This explanation made Maria's eyes widen. Until then, she had kept a passive role, but now, Laura's attitude made her respect her. Daniel turned his eyes to Victoria. "It looks like we'll need to talk about how neutral the HR department was in handling this process," he said, his expression unusually stern. Victoria began shaking her head in panic. "But we just followed procedure, the information in her file." She couldn't finish her sentence. Laura placed her bag back on her lap and stood up. This time, she wasn't just a departing candidate. She looked like a coming leader. With slow but determined steps, she circled the table, looking into the eyes of everyone in the room. "This company's heart has never been about appearances or titles. My father always said that. True value is hidden beneath the surface, and I'm here to bring that value back to the forefront." Maria breathed a deep sigh inside. Maybe for the first time in years, she felt that what was happening at the head of the company was the right thing. Daniel nodded and accompanied Laura. "From today onwards, the position of chairwoman is Laura's. I'm honored to work with her. And yes, we'll be going over the details of what happened in the past." Before leaving, Laura turned back one more time. "I'll schedule one-on-one meetings. I want to see every department, hear every voice. Because the foundation we'll rebuild this company on will be the voices that were ignored." At that moment, Marcus' face fell. Victoria clutched her phone with trembling hands, but it was too late. The storm had come, and even those at its center wouldn't be able to protect themselves. At the end of the day, Laura sat alone in her office, looking at the old leather bag her father had given her years ago. This bag still carried the excitement of the man who had laid the foundations of the company. Inside, it held not just documents but also justice and principles. Laura gently opened the bag and pulled out a USB stick. This stick contained some documents her father had compiled before he died. The documents and doubts. There were inconsistencies in some international transfers conducted by the company's CFO, Marcus Weber, over the past years. Laura knew her father's suspicious nature well, but these documents were overly detailed. Now, her task was not just revenge. It was to uncover the truth and clean the company of anything that had tarnished it. The next morning, as the meeting hour approached in the company's executive floor, everyone had the same question on their minds. What would the new president do? But no one knew yet that Laura Brandt would not only be the chairwoman, but also the walking embodiment of justice. The new day had fallen over the building like a thick curtain of fog. But no matter how gray the weather outside was, the company's executive floor was unusually lively today. Gossip spread from ear to ear, turning into whispers around the coffee machines, and in every employee's eyes, the question, "What's going to happen?" sparkled. The chair of the board had just taken her seat, but her influence had already spread through the corridors. The top floor of the company seemed to be experiencing the calm before the storm. Laura Brandt had worn her simple navy jacket again, her hair tied back, and her father's old bag resting beside her chair. Today, she was holding her first official board meeting. Marcus Weber was still at the table, observing everything with calm but watchful eyes. Next to him, Victoria Lehman, Despite the concealer under her eyes, couldn't hide the signs of sleeplessness. Maria Kruger sat quietly in the corner, silent but alert. Daniel Hartmann opened the meeting. Today, we turn a new page, he said. Without forgetting the past, we will build the future. Laura slowly stood up and took the floor. There are 3 principles at the foundation of this company: integrity, merit, and sustainability. I'm here to bring these principles back to life. Her words were simple but profound. The people at the table shifted slightly. Marcus tried to maintain his composure, but the twitch in his jaw gave him away. Laura opened the folder in front of her and took out some documents. I've been reviewing some notable entries in the international financial transactions from the last few years. And one consulting firm particularly caught my attention: Helix Consulting. Marcus' grip on his pen tightened. Laura continued. This firm has invoiced our company more than $12 million in the past 3 years. But oddly enough, there's no office address, no employee information, and even the phone number redirects to a virtual call center. Victoria interjected, her voice low but anxious. Maybe it was used for some outsourced services, sometimes for security. Laura turned her eyes to Victoria. That could be the case. But when you realize that these contracts were signed personally by Marcus Weber, the suspicion grows. Especially when some of these payments were made just days before my father's death. A deep silence fell across the table. Even Daniel slightly lowered his head. This was no longer just an ethical issue. It was a potential crime. Marcus, trying to suppress the tension on his face, spoke. This is a very serious accusation. You only have documents. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. These kinds of transfers are sometimes not what they seem. Laura smiled slowly. You're right, Marcus. Documents alone aren't enough. That's why I'll be requesting an independent audit. A third-party financial analysis firm will review all transactions, including the past 5 years. And we will also restructure the flow of information within the company. All departments will report directly to the board. Victoria clasped her hands in her lap. Marcus remained silent, but his eyes drifted not to Laura, but to her bag. That bag, it was so familiar to him. James Hartmann, the founder himself, used to bring that bag to every critical meeting. Maybe what Laura carried with her wasn't just documents, but also the weight of the legacy. When the meeting ended and everyone began to leave, Maria stayed behind. She approached Laura and quietly asked, "Did your father notice this connection before?" Laura shook her head with a hint of sorrow. "Yes, but he didn't want to take action without proof. Before he passed away, he left me these documents. He told me, when the time comes, you'll know what to do." Maria paused for a moment, then looked into Laura's eyes. "If there's anything I can help with." Laura placed her hand on Maria's shoulder. "Yes, there is. I need honest and principled people. Because this isn't just a reckoning. This is a healing process." In that moment, the 2 women looked at each other, bound by a connection built in the shadows of the past. This was no longer just a company matter. It was the struggle to restore a father's legacy, a woman's justice, and a company's conscience. But there was still one more person silently watching from the corner: Marcus Weber. That day, he didn't say a word to Laura. But on his phone, a backup plan had already been set in motion. This game was just beginning. As the last light of the day licked the large windows of the executive floor, Laura was left alone in her office. Her father's bag still sat on her desk, as if its presence was casting a protective shield over the entire building. But Laura now knew all too well. Some wars start invisibly, and hers, from that moment on, would become visible. While reviewing the files on the USB drive, one detail caught her eye that changed everything. The majority of the payments made to the fake consulting firm, Helix Consulting, weren't only approved by Marcus, but also by another executive. That person was Victoria Lehman. This information didn't stun Laura, but it did slightly challenge her composure. The role Victoria had been playing in front of her face was much deeper than she had imagined. It seemed that this wasn't just about money. It was part of a long-planned power shift. Her father's sudden heart attack and the subsequent leadership gap. Perhaps it wasn't entirely a coincidence. Laura immediately called Maria. In the few quiet but swift minutes that followed, she spread the documents across the table. "Look at these signatures. Pay close attention," she said. As Maria skimmed through them, her expression tightened. "Victoria, I never thought she could be involved in this." Laura nodded silently. "None of us did. That's why it works. Just then, there was a knock on the door. A message from the secretary. Marcus Weber has requested an unusual meeting first thing tomorrow morning. Laura made a note of it. Was this just an innocent meeting? Or was it a threat? Her instincts pointed to the latter. Because at the same time, there was another email from the company's legal advisor, Edwin Voigt. An extraordinary restructuring proposal with unusual documents is being prepared within the management team. Marcus and Victoria may be working on it together. This was no longer personal. This was a direct attack on Laura's legitimate power within the company. If the management structure changed and decision-making powers were shifted to other departments, the true influence of her shares and the chairmanship title would be rendered meaningless. The company's fate was teetering on the edge of an internal coup. That night, Laura stayed in the office. The rain had started, just like the night her father had died. As she looked out the window, she wasn't just watching the raindrops, but the shadows of her memories. She thought about the last argument she'd had with her father. This company isn't your inheritance. It's your test, he had told her. At the time, those words had felt harsh. But now everything was crystal clear. It was past midnight when Maria returned with tea. Laura was still staring at the screen. Why do you think these people still choose to live in my father's shadow? She asked, tired but curious. Maria's voice was full when she answered. Because they don't know the name of what you possess. To them, power is control, documents, signatures, and titles. But what you have is principle, and they can't win against principle. Laura took a deep breath. The meeting the next day would be decisive. If they could push through the management restructuring, all their efforts would be in vain. But if Laura made the right move, it wouldn't just be a victory, it would be the beginning of a cleansing. And that night, when she opened her father's bag, something else she found in the hidden compartment made everything fall into place. An old voice recorder. A small, seemingly harmless device. But for Laura, it would soon become a weapon. Her father never left a battle quietly. And clearly, his plan was still unfolding. The meeting room was more crowded than usual that morning. The weather was gloomy, and the atmosphere inside was heavy with tension. As the company's top executives took their seats one by one, everyone had the same expression, expectant but cautious. Marcus Weber, in a perfectly tailored suit, with his hair slicked back as usual, sat at the table. Next to him was Victoria Lehman. Her usual arrogant posture had been replaced by a tense but determined resolve. This duo had come with a plan, and the name of that plan was the restructuring proposal. Daniel Hartmann gave the opening speech but kept it brief. When he turned his gaze to Laura, a few seconds of silence between them felt like a hidden agreement. Then, the floor went to Marcus, and his first sentence plunged the room into a cold, eerie silence. Today, I'd like to present a new structural model that will enhance the company's sustainability in the global market and improve management efficiency, he said. In this model, the chairman's role in executive decision-making will be limited, and operational decisions will be made by a special executive committee. The sentences were polished, and the terms dazzling. But for Laura, these were just the manifesto of a blow, said in a different way. If this proposal passed, she would be nothing more than an honorary chairman with no decision-making authority. Marcus continued his presentation. Slides, statistics, international examples filled a fake vision show. Victoria occasionally stepped in, supporting with numerical data. Some slight nodding began in the meeting room. Some members were taking notes with hesitation, while others avoided eye contact. When the presentation ended, Marcus leaned back, as if he had won a battle. "We can move to the vote," he said confidently. But in that moment, Laura stood up. Before saying a word, she reached for her father's bag, pulled out an old voice recorder, and placed it on the table. "Before we proceed," she said, in a calm but firm tone, "I think you need to listen to something." All eyes turned to her. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Laura pressed the button on the device. The recording began with a high-pitched sound, followed by a familiar male voice. "James, I told you. This structure is unsustainable. We need to reallocate some of the company's resources through other channels. Helix has the capacity to handle these. You don't understand, we can't compete with the old ways anymore." The faces of those listening went pale, because it was Marcus' voice. And more importantly, the person he was speaking to was Laura's father. This was a recording of a secret conversation held shortly before his death. It wasn't just unethical. It contained material that could be the subject of a criminal investigation. Laura spoke without taking her eyes off Marcus. This isn't just a conversation. This is the beginning of an attempt to funnel company resources to an illegal consulting firm. My father knew this, but the heart attack silenced him. I will not be silenced. Victoria quickly intervened. This recording is illegal. Something like this can't be presented as evidence. Laura turned to her, her face hard for the first time. These conversations were systematically archived by my father as part of the company's security systems. These recordings are legally available on the company's server. They were extracted by the legal department itself. The oldest member of the board, a respected figure who had been on the board for years, broke the silence. I propose that an independent review committee be established, and the vote on this structural change proposal should be suspended. The vote was taken. Marcus' restructuring plan was rejected. The pieces on the table had shifted, but Marcus remained silent, because he knew the war wasn't over. When his eyes met Laura's, there was no threat in them, but rather a spark of revenge. His gaze said, "This is just the beginning." When the meeting ended, Maria came over to Laura. "You stopped him, but I'm sure he's now a much more dangerous person." Laura slowly closed her father's bag. "Even in that state, he doesn't scare me, because I'm not alone anymore." Everything had changed after that day's meeting. Trust was starting to be rebuilt among the board members, and the recording that shook Marcus' power had created a deep impact throughout the company. But Laura knew this was only the visible part of the war, because evil never collapses with the first blow, and sometimes darkness continues to whisper from the quietest corners. In the following days, the independent audit firm had begun its work, thoroughly reviewing the financial records. Maria Kruger was no longer just a trusted team member. She had become Laura's closest ally. Edwin Voigt, the loyal legal advisor who had stood by her father for years, took on the legal coordination of this new process. Everyone had taken their place. It was time to redefine the true structure of the company. But there was one person who remained silent: Marcus Weber. The first employee to arrive at his office that morning found it empty and abandoned. His computer was shut off, and the documents on his desk were neatly packed away. Marcus had disappeared without a trace, or so it seemed. Later that afternoon, a letter with no sender name arrived at Laura's office. Inside, there was only a note and a USB drive. The note contained one sentence: "You didn't win. I'm just waiting for my turn." When Laura reviewed the drive, she found email documents, bank transactions, and carefully hidden connections. But this time, these weren't Marcus. They belonged to Victoria Lehman. It seemed that the two weren't working together. In fact, they were using each other. While Victoria distracted Marcus, she had been growing her own financial interests behind the scenes. And after Marcus' departure, he sent this information to Laura, perhaps fulfilling his desire to take her out of the game. Maybe it was a guilty instinct saying, "You stopped me, but don't forget about the other one." Laura shared this new information with Maria and Edwin. The investigation was expanded. Within days, Victoria was removed from her executive role. After a formal complaint was filed with the prosecutor's office, an investigation was launched for using company data illegally, falsifying consulting reports, and embezzling money. She was quietly escorted out of the office she had once arrogantly occupied. This time, her bag was branded, but her gaze was disheveled. For Laura, victory was a cold emotion. One evening, alone in her father's office, she looked at the old bag. Inside, there were no longer just documents, but a notebook and a pocket watch. On the back of the watch, her father had written those words: "True value is hidden in the unseen." A year passed. The company now went by the name Westbridge Holding. With its focus on sustainability projects, new leadership policies, and transparent auditing mechanisms, it had become one of the most trusted brands in the industry. Laura was no longer just an executive. She had become a symbol of principle. At that year's leadership summit, she gave a speech in front of thousands of employees. Her eyes were not weary, but clear. In her hand was still that old leather bag. She ended her speech with these words: "What brought me to this company was not my last name. It wasn't even my expertise. It was my values. Every person here today is here because they share the same value. And I promise you, this bag will carry not just documents, but justice from now on. Because we no longer believe in what is visible, we believe in what is essential." The applause that rose from the hall wasn't just for an executive. It was for a legacy that finally delivered justice, for a philosophy, and for a woman leader's quiet but unshakable strength. At the back of the room, a young woman was silently taking notes. She was simply dressed, her eyes shining. She held an old briefcase in her hands. Laura noticed her, slightly nodding and smiling. Because she knew, those seats change. But the stories, they always begin again. If this story has impacted you, if you believe that justice always finds its way, sooner or later, and if you value substance over appearance, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Maybe one day, your story will be told here as well.